The explosion that should have destroyed everything instead became a moment of impossible beauty as the defiant scrap's adaptive shields absorbed and redirected the massive energy release. What had been meant as an act of suicidal vengeance transformed into streams of harmless light that danced across the hull of the human vessel like aurora flames against a midnight sky. Jake Morrison felt his ship shudder as exotic energies flowed through systems that had been designed by a civilization far wiser than any that currently ruled the galaxy. When the light finally faded, Admiral Vextar's dreadnought was gone, reduced to scattered debris that would eventually fall into the gravity well of Corvin Prime. The surviving Coalition ships hung motionless in space, their crews stunned by what they had witnessed. Amy Stone's fingers flew across her communication console as she transmitted the complete Corvin historical archives to every major news network, government center, and academic institution in Coalition space. The truth about the Liberation War, the genocide of the Corvin species, and the theft of advanced technology would spread faster than any government could suppress it. "It's done," she announced. "The data packages are already being downloaded by thousands of recipients across the galaxy. Even if every coalition government tries to declare this information classified, there are too many copies in too many places to stop it now." Ben Carter was monitoring the reaction as news networks began broadcasting emergency bulletins about the revelations. "Jake, you need to see this. They're calling it the biggest political scandal in galactic history. Coalition governments are issuing denials, but the evidence is too detailed and too extensive for anyone to dismiss." Lisa Park emerged from the engineering section, her face glowing with excitement despite the exhaustion of the past few weeks. "The ship performed perfectly," she reported. "Every system integration worked exactly as Architect predicted. We've got technology here that's centuries ahead of anything the Coalition has." The surviving Coalition vessels were requesting permission to evacuate their damaged ships and return to their home systems. Jake granted the requests, knowing that these individual crews were not responsible for the crimes of their ancestors. As the enemy ships limped away from Corvin Prime, he opened a channel to address their departing commanders. "Tell your governments that humanity remembers what happened here," he said. "Tell them that the age of building power on stolen graves is over. And tell them that Earth will be watching to make sure it never happens again." Sam Brooks had been treating wounded Coalition personnel who had been transferred to the Defiant Scrap's enhanced medical facilities. "Jake, some of these officers want to know if they can request asylum. They're saying that when this news breaks, there are going to be war crimes, tribunals, and political purges throughout Coalition space." It was a problem Jake had not anticipated. The revelation of the Corvin genocide would destabilize the entire galactic political structure, potentially leading to civil wars and system-wide conflicts as different species turned against each other. The cure for Coalition oppression might end up being worse than the original disease. Architect's voice echoed through the ship's communication system as if the AI had been reading Jake's thoughts. "Captain Morrison, you face the same choice that confronted the Corvin leadership 500 years ago. You have the power to reshape galactic civilization, but power without wisdom leads only to repetition of old mistakes." Jake gathered his crew in the ship's main conference room, which had been expanded and upgraded with holographic displays that could show detailed star maps and political analyses. "We need to decide what happens next," he said. "We've got enough advanced technology to make Earth the dominant military power in the galaxy, but I'm not sure that's what we want." Lisa was studying technical specifications for weapons that could destroy entire star systems with a single shot. "The temptation is definitely there," she admitted. "With this knowledge, We could demand that every species in the galaxy treat humanity as equals. No more being assigned to garbage collection duty. But then we'd be exactly what the Coalition accused the Corvin of being, Amy pointed out. Oppressive overlords using superior technology to dominate everyone else. The cycle would just start over again with different people in charge. Ben was running simulations on his navigation computers, plotting potential future scenarios based on different choices they could make. According to these projections, if we use Corvin military technology to establish human dominance, we'd have about 200 years before some other species develops countermeasures and tries to eliminate us the same way the Coalition eliminated the Corvin. Sam had been quiet during most of the discussion, but now he spoke up with the moral clarity that made him such a good doctor. The question isn't what we can do, it's what we should do. We've seen what happens when species use advanced technology to oppress others. Do we really want to become the next example of that? Jake looked around the table at his crew, these ordinary humans who had somehow stumbled into a situation that would determine the future of galactic civilization. They could return to Earth as conquering heroes, bringing technological advancement that would solve every problem humanity had ever faced. Or they could try something that no species in galactic history had ever attempted. Architect, what would the Corvin have done in our situation? The AI considered the question for several moments before responding. The Corvin believed that true advancement could only come through cooperation between equals. They would have shared their knowledge freely with any species that demonstrated wisdom and ethical behavior. But they would also have established safeguards to prevent that knowledge from being used for oppression or genocide. Jake made his decision. We're going back to Coalition space, but not as conquerors. We're going to offer the Corvin knowledge to any species that wants it, with conditions attached. They have to agree to use the technology for peaceful development only, and they have to submit to monitoring to make sure they keep that agreement. Amy raised an eyebrow. You're talking about fundamentally restructuring galactic civilization, creating a new form of government based on cooperation instead of dominance. That's either incredibly naive or incredibly ambitious, maybe both, Jake admitted. But the alternative is to become the next galactic empire that someone will eventually have to overthrow. I'd rather try to break the cycle entirely. The journey back to Coalition space took several weeks, during which Amy monitored news reports about the political chaos spreading throughout the galaxy. Coalition member governments were falling as populations learned the truth about their histories. Several species had already declared independence from the central authority, while others were demanding reparations for centuries of exploitation. By the time the Defiant scrap reached Earth orbit, humanity had become the most famous species in the galaxy. Every major news network wanted interviews with the crew that had uncovered the greatest cover-up in galactic history. Diplomatic missions from dozens of species were requesting meetings to discuss humanity's intentions and capabilities. Jake found himself standing in the same briefing hall where Admiral Vexitar had humiliated them months earlier. But this time, the audience was very different. Representatives from every major species sat in respectful silence as he outlined humanity's proposal for a new galactic alliance based on the Corvin model of voluntary cooperation. The knowledge we recovered from Corvin Prime will be shared freely with any species that commits to peaceful development and mutual respect, he announced. But this technology comes with responsibility. We will not allow it to be used for conquest or oppression. A Solari diplomat raised one translucent wing to ask a question. What gives humanity the right to make such decisions for the rest of the galaxy? Jake smiled, remembering the same arrogance he had once seen in Coalition leadership. Nothing gives us that right. That's exactly the point. We're not claiming authority over anyone else. We're offering partnership to anyone who wants it, with the understanding that partnership requires mutual trust and shared values. The proposal that emerged from months of negotiation became known as the Corvin Accords, a new form of galactic government that emphasized voluntary cooperation over centralized control. Species could choose their own level of participation, from simple trade agreements to full technological sharing partnerships. Earth became the first headquarters world of the new alliance, not because humans claimed any special authority, but because they had proven their commitment to the principles of peaceful cooperation. The Defiant scrap, still looking like a cobbled-together collection of spare parts despite its advanced capabilities, served as the flagship of a fleet that included vessels from dozens of different species. Lisa Park established the Corvin Institute, a research facility where scientists from multiple species worked together to develop new technologies for peaceful purposes. Amy Stone created a cultural exchange program that helped different species understand each other's histories and values. Ben Carter founded a navigation service that mapped safe routes through dangerous regions of space, making exploration and trade safer for everyone. Sam Brooks opened medical. Captain Jake Martinez stood on the bridge of the Wanderer and watched Earth grow smaller in the view screen. The blue marble that had been home to humanity for millions of years was now just another dot of light among countless stars. His crew of 200 souls had volunteered for this mission, knowing they might never return. They were heading into the unknown depths of space to answer signals that had puzzled Earth's scientists for decades. The ship hummed around him with quiet efficiency. The Wanderer was humanity's greatest achievement, built with technology that pushed the boundaries of what was possible. The faster-than-light drive that would carry them to distant stars was still experimental. Many scientists back on Earth had argued it was too dangerous to test on a manned mission, but Jake and his crew had insisted they were ready. Lisa Brown sat at the science station reviewing their course one final time. She had spent 5 years helping design this mission and another 3 training for it. The signals they were chasing came from the Kepler 442 system, over 1,200 light-years from Earth. The patterns were too complex to be natural phenomena, but too alien to understand. Whatever was sending them had been trying to communicate. For over 50 years, Tony Garcia called out from the engineering section that all systems were running perfectly. The young man had practically grown up inside starship engines and knew the Wanderer better than anyone. He had personally installed many of the experimental components that would keep them alive during their long journey. His confidence in the ship was absolute, and that confidence spread to the rest of the crew. Amy Johnson monitored communications from her position near the bridge. The last messages from Earth were wishes of good luck and promises to keep listening for their signals. She would be responsible for maintaining contact with home during their journey, though the vast distances would mean delays measured in years rather than minutes. Each transmission would be a message sent into an uncertain future. Jake activated the ship-wide communication system and spoke to his crew for the last time before they left the solar system. His voice carried to every corner of the Wanderer, reaching the botanists tending to the food gardens, the engineers monitoring the fusion reactors, and the pilots preparing for the unknown challenges ahead. He reminded them that they carried the hopes of all humanity with them. The captain explained that they were not going as conquerors, but as ambassadors of Earth. Their mission was to make peaceful contact with whatever intelligence was sending the signals. If they found friends among the stars, humanity would gain allies who could teach them wonders beyond imagination. If they found threats, they would gather intelligence that could help Earth prepare for whatever might come. The ship crossed beyond the orbit of Pluto and left the familiar territory of their home system. The gravity of the sun began to fade, and the Wanderer prepared to make its first jump into hyperspace. The crew strapped themselves into their stations as the experimental drive powered up. Strange energies flowed through conduits that ran like arteries through the ship's hull. Jake felt a moment of doubt as he watched the readings climb toward the jump threshold. They were about to trust their lives to technology that existed more in theory than proven practice. But his crew had trained for this moment for years. Every person aboard the Wanderer was the best humanity had to offer in their field. If anyone could make this impossible journey, it was them. The hyperspace drive engaged with a sound like reality tearing apart. The stars outside twisted into impossible shapes as space folded around the ship. The Wanderer slipped between the normal dimensions and began racing toward distant stars at speeds that would have been pure fantasy just a century before. The journey to Kepler 442 would take them through regions of space no human had ever seen. During the first weeks of travel, the crew settled into routines that would sustain them for the long journey ahead. The ship's gardens provided fresh food while recycling systems cleaned their air and water. Training programs kept their skills sharp, while entertainment systems helped pass the endless hours between stars. The Wanderer had been designed to be a self-contained world capable of supporting its crew for decades if necessary. Lisa Brown spent her time analyzing the signals they were chasing. The mathematical patterns were incredibly complex, suggesting an intelligence far more advanced than humanity. Some sections seemed to be star charts showing the locations of habitable worlds. Other parts might be scientific formulas or perhaps poetry from an alien mind. The more she studied them, the more convinced she became that they were heading towards something extraordinary. Tony Garcia worked constantly to optimize the ship's systems for the long journey. The experimental technologies aboard the Wanderer were still revealing new capabilities as they operated in the strange environment of hyperspace. He discovered that their quantum processors could think faster while traveling between dimensions. The fusion reactors ran more efficiently when exposed to the exotic energies that surrounded them. Amy Johnson maintained a careful log of their journey and prepared reports for Earth, even though transmission would not be possible until they dropped back into normal space. She recorded everything they observed during their passage through hyperspace, documenting phenomena that Earth's physicists could study for centuries. The data they were gathering would revolutionize human understanding of how the universe really worked. The months passed quietly as the Wanderer raced through the void between galaxies. The crew adapted to life aboard their small world and grew closer as they shared the isolation of deep space. They were the farthest any humans had ever traveled from Earth, pioneers crossing an ocean of stars toward an uncertain destination. Jake often stood alone on the observation deck and watched the strange lights that flickered in hyperspace. Sometimes, he thought he saw patterns in the chaos, as if something was watching their passage through dimensions that had no names. The sensation made him uneasy, but he attributed it to the natural anxiety of commanding humanity's most important mission. What the crew of the Wanderer did not know was that their passage through hyperspace had been detected by ancient intelligences that dwelled in the spaces between galaxies. These beings were older than most stars and hungry for the life force that burned so brightly in sapient minds. They had been sleeping in the cosmic void for millions of years, waiting for new prey to venture into their domain. The psychic signature of 200 human minds racing through hyperspace was like a beacon in the darkness. The entities began to stir from their long slumber, drawn by the promise of fresh souls to devour. They had consumed countless species over the eons, draining entire civilizations until nothing remained but empty worlds circling dead stars. As the Wanderer continued toward its destination, the ancient predators began to follow. They moved through dimensions that existed parallel to hyperspace, shadowing the human ship as it carried its crew toward what they believed would be humanity's greatest discovery. Instead, they were leading humanity's oldest nightmares directly toward Earth. The Wanderer emerged from hyperspace near a binary star system that blazed with colors no human eyes had ever seen. Jake Martinez stood on the bridge and watched two suns dance around each other in a cosmic ballet that had been playing out for billions of years. The ship's sensors immediately detected artificial structures orbiting the smaller star, confirming that they had found the source of the mysterious signals. Lisa Brown worked frantically at her station as data flowed in from their scanning arrays. The structures were massive, each one larger than Earth's moon, and they were clearly built by intelligence far beyond anything humanity had achieved. Mathematical patterns flowed across her screens as the alien constructs continued broadcasting their signals into space. She realized they had been calling out to anyone who might be listening for centuries. The first contact protocols that Earth's diplomats had spent decades developing seemed inadequate when faced with intelligence on such a scale. Jake ordered the ship to maintain a safe distance while they studied the alien constructs and tried to understand their purpose. The crew had trained for this moment, but no amount of preparation could have readied them for the reality of meeting beings from another world. Amy Johnson tried to establish communication using basic mathematical concepts and universal constants. She broadcast prime numbers and simple equations, hoping to demonstrate that the humans aboard the Wanderer were intelligent beings seeking peaceful contact. The response came within hours, and it was more complex than anything Earth's greatest minds had ever conceived. The aliens who built the structures called themselves the architects, and their response to human contact was immediate and welcoming. They transmitted detailed star charts showing habitable worlds throughout the local galactic region, along with mathematical proofs that solved problems human scientists had been working on for generations. The knowledge they shared freely would have advanced human civilization by centuries. Jake led a small team aboard a shuttle to visit one of the alien constructs. The architects did not have physical bodies as humans understood them, existing instead as patterns of living energy within crystalline matrices that spanned kilometers. They communicated through direct transmission of concepts and emotions, making translation unnecessary. The humans found themselves understanding alien thoughts as clearly as their own. The architects explained that they were explorers like the humans, seeking knowledge and understanding throughout the galaxy. They had detected the Wanderer's passage through hyperspace and were curious about this new species that had achieved faster-than-light travel. The aliens were impressed by humanity's rapid technological development and eager to share their own discoveries. During the weeks the Wanderer spent with the architects, the human crew learned to manipulate matter at the quantum level. Tony Garcia worked alongside alien engineers to upgrade the ship's systems with technology that seemed like magic. The fusion reactors were replaced with quantum generators that drew energy directly from the fabric of space itself. The hull was reinforced with materials that could exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Lisa Brown collaborated with architect scientists to map regions of space that human astronomers had never detected. They showed her galaxies beyond, the observable universe and explained how consciousness itself could influence the fundamental forces of reality. The knowledge was overwhelming, but she absorbed everything she could, knowing that each discovery could transform human understanding of existence. The most startling revelation came when the architects warned them about ancient dangers that lurked in the spaces between galaxies. They spoke of beings called the Devourers, entities of pure entropy that consumed the life force of entire civilizations. These predators had been dormant for millions of years, but the architects feared that increased faster-than-light travel might wake them from their slumber. Jake felt a chill when he realized that the Wanderer's journey through hyperspace might have already attracted the attention of these cosmic predators. The architects confirmed his worst fears, explaining that the psychic signature of sapient minds traveling at faster-than-light speeds was like a beacon to the Devourers. Every ship that used hyperspace risked drawing the ancient hunters toward populated worlds. The crew spent their remaining time with the architects learning everything possible about the Devourers and how to defend against them. The aliens shared weapons technology and defensive strategies developed over millions of years of galactic exploration. They also began modifying the human crew members, enhancing their bodies and minds to better survive the challenges that lay ahead. The modifications were voluntary but irreversible. Each human who accepted the changes found their consciousness expanded beyond the normal limitations of organic brains. They could think faster, process more information, and perceive dimensions of reality that had been invisible before. The changes were subtle at first, but they marked the beginning of humanity's evolution into something greater. When the Wanderer finally left the architect system, it carried knowledge and technology that would have taken human civilization millennia to develop independently. But it also carried the terrible knowledge that their journey home might lead the Devourers directly to Earth. Jake made the difficult decision to continue their mission, visiting other star systems to gather more allies and weapons for the war that was coming. Their next encounter was with the chorus minds of Wolf 359. Gaseous beings that existed as collective consciousnesses spanning entire nebulae. These entities taught the human crew how to link their minds together while maintaining their individual identities. The humans learned to share thoughts and emotions across vast distances, creating a mental network that connected every member of the crew. Amy Johnson became the focal point of this mental network, her consciousness serving as a bridge between individual crew members. She could coordinate the ship's operations by thinking directly to each department, making the Wanderer respond to the crew's collective will rather than traditional control systems. The ship itself began to evolve, its technology merging with the enhanced minds of its human operators. The final transformation came when they encountered the dying remnants of the Eternal Fleet, ancient warriors who had been fighting the Devourers for countless ages. The fleet's commander was barely alive, his body sustained by technologies beyond human understanding. With his last breath, he passed on the terrible knowledge of how the Devourers hunted and what it took to stop them. Tony Garcia volunteered to merge partially with the ship's quantum processors, becoming a living interface between human intuition and alien technology. His consciousness spread throughout the Wanderer's systems, making him one with the ship itself. Lisa Brown's awareness expanded across multiple dimensional phases, allowing her to perceive threats and opportunities that existed outside normal space-time. The crew of the Wanderer had become something new during their 11-year journey. They were still recognizably human, but they had evolved beyond the limitations of their original biology. They could survive in the vacuum of space, think at the speed of light, and perceive reality in ways their ancestors never could have imagined. They had become humanity's first guardians, armed with knowledge and abilities necessary to protect their species from cosmic predators. As the Wanderer began its long journey back to Earth, the crew knew they were racing against time. The Devourers had awakened from their ancient slumber and were following the psychic trail the ship had left during its passage through hyperspace. Humanity had perhaps months before these cosmic predators reached the solar system. But the crew was no longer afraid. They had learned much during their journey among the stars, and they were returning home as more than human. They carried weapons that could challenge beings older than galaxies, and knowledge that would transform human civilization. The Devourers might be ancient and terrible, but they had never faced a species like humanity before. The void between galaxies writhed with movement as ancient nightmares stirred from their eternal slumber. The Devourers had been sleeping in the cosmic darkness for millions of years, waiting for the psychic signature of sapient life to call them back to consciousness. The Wanderer's passage through hyperspace had been like a clarion call echoing through dimensions. And now the hunger was awakening. Jake Martinez felt the change first, his enhanced consciousness picking up distortions in the fabric of space-time that normal human senses could never have detected. The modifications he had received from the architects allowed him to perceive reality across multiple dimensions, and what he saw in the spaces between stars filled him with dread. Something vast and malevolent was moving toward their region of the galaxy with purpose and terrible hunger. The ship's quantum sensors confirmed his worst fears as they detected massive gravitational anomalies approaching from the galactic rim. The Devourers were not ships or creatures in any sense that humans would understand. They were entities of pure entropy, beings that existed as living voids in the structure of reality itself. Each one was the size of a small moon, capable of draining the life force from entire worlds with nothing more than focused intention. Lisa Brown worked frantically to analyze the sensor data while her expanded consciousness processed information at speeds that would have burned out an unmodified human brain. The mathematical patterns that described the approaching entities defied conventional physics, suggesting beings that existed partially outside normal space-time. They moved through dimensions that had no names, following the psychic trail that the Wanderer had left during its 11-year journey. Tony Garcia felt the ship respond to the crew's growing alarm as his merged consciousness communicated directly with the Wanderer's quantum processors. The vessel had evolved far beyond its original specifications during their journey, becoming something that was part technology and part living organism. Its hull pulsed with energy that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, and its weapon systems incorporated principles that human science had only begun to understand. The crew gathered on the bridge to discuss their options, though much of their communication now took place through the mental network that Amy Johnson maintained. She had become the focal point of their collective consciousness, her mind serving as a bridge between individual thoughts and the ship's increasingly sophisticated artificial intelligence. The Wanderer itself had begun to display signs of awakening, awareness, as if their journey had given birth to a new form of life. Jake faced the most difficult decision of his career as captain of humanity's most advanced starship. They could try to outrun the Devourers and lead them away from populated systems, but the ancient predators were faster than anything the Wanderer could achieve. They could attempt to hide, but beings that hunted across galactic distances would eventually track down their quarry. Or they could return to Earth and prepare humanity for a war unlike anything their species had ever faced. The choice was made when their long-range sensors detected the first scout forms of the Devourers already, probing the outer systems of local star clusters. The main swarm was still months away, but advance elements were moving ahead to identify targets and assess defenses. Earth had become the focus of their attention, the bright beacon of human consciousness, drawing them like moths to flame. Amy Johnson sent desperate messages toward Earth using quantum communication arrays that the architects had helped them install. The signals would take weeks to reach their destination, but they carried warning of the approaching disaster and detailed information about the entities that threatened all human life. She included technical specifications for weapons and defenses that might give Earth's military forces a chance against cosmic predators. The Wanderer changed course toward home, but not in retreat. The crew had decided to make their stand in defense of humanity, using everything they had learned during their journey among the stars. They would not simply warn Earth of the approaching danger. They would teach their species how to evolve and fight back against beings that had consumed countless civilizations across the eons. During the long weeks of travel toward the solar system, the crew continued their transformation into something beyond normal human limitations. Jake found his consciousness expanding to encompass vast regions of space, allowing him to perceive the movements of the Devourer swarm across multiple star systems. His body had become something between flesh and energy, sustained by forces that existed outside conventional physics. Lisa Brown's research into the nature of the Devourers revealed the terrible scope of their hunger. These beings did not simply kill their victims, they consumed the very essence of consciousness itself, leaving behind empty shells of matter that retained no trace of the life that had once inhabited them. Entire species had been reduced to mindless automatons serving the will of their devourers, their civilizations continuing to function while their souls fed ancient appetites. The aliens they had encountered during their journey had been trying to warn them about more than just the devourers themselves. The cosmic predators were only the most visible threat in a universe filled with entities that viewed sapient life as nothing more than food. Humanity's rapid expansion into space had attracted attention from beings that existed in dimensions parallel to normal reality, and the Wanderer's return to Earth would bring this attention to humanity's doorstep. Tony Garcia worked to prepare the ship for battles that would be fought across multiple dimensions simultaneously. The weapon systems he had designed incorporated principles learned from the Eternal Fleet, devices that could strike at beings existing partially outside normal space-time. The Wanderer's hull had been reinforced with materials that could withstand attacks from entities that manipulated the fundamental forces of reality. As they approached the outer edge of the solar system, the crew of the Wanderer detected signs that Earth had received their warnings and was beginning to prepare. Military vessels were taking positions throughout the system, while research stations worked frantically to implement the technologies that had been transmitted from deep space. Humanity was adapting with the speed that had allowed their species to survive every previous extinction-level threat. But Jake knew that conventional weapons and normal human soldiers would be insufficient against the approaching swarm. The Devourers had consumed civilizations far more advanced than current human technology species that had thousands of years more experience with space warfare. Victory would require humanity to evolve as rapidly as possible, transforming themselves into something capable of fighting cosmic predators on equal terms. The first contact with Earth's defense forces came when the Wanderer crossed the orbit of Neptune and encountered a patrol squadron that had been waiting for their arrival. The human vessels were equipped with new weapons based on specifications that Amy Johnson had transmitted months earlier, but their crews were still normal humans operating with the limitations of unenhanced biology. Jake made the decision to begin sharing the modifications that the crew had received during their journey among the stars. Volunteer pilots and soldiers were brought aboard the Wanderer to undergo the same evolutionary processes that had transformed the original crew. The changes were traumatic and not always successful, but those who survived emerged as something far more capable of facing the threats that approached from deep space. The transformation of humanity had begun, but time was running short. Long-range sensors detected the main devourer swarm crossing into the local galactic region, moving with purpose toward the bright beacon of consciousness that was Earth. The scout forms had already begun probing the outer planets of the solar system, testing the defenses that humanity was desperately trying to establish. Lisa Brown calculated that they had perhaps weeks before the full force of ancient predators reached Earth's orbit. The time for preparation was ending, and the time for humanity to prove itself capable of survival among the stars was beginning. The species that had once huddled around fires in African caves was about to face its greatest test, a war for survival against beings older than human civilization. Earth's defense networks went into full alert when the Wanderer finally appeared on long-range sensors approaching the inner solar system. The ship that returned bore little resemblance to the vessel that had departed 11 years earlier. Its hull pulsed with energies that existed in multiple dimensions, and exotic matter formations extended from its surface like organic growths. The readings made no sense to human scientists, suggesting technologies that operated on principles beyond current understanding. Admiral Robert Kane commanded the defensive fleet from his flagship orbiting Mars, and he watched the approaching vessel with growing unease. The Wanderer was broadcasting human identification codes, but the energy signatures were unlike anything in Earth's databases. Intelligence reports from deep space monitoring stations described gravitational anomalies and spatial distortions that suggested the ship had been fundamentally altered during its long journey among the stars. Jake Martinez opened communication, channels with Earth's military command as the Wanderer crossed the orbit of Jupiter. His image appeared on screens throughout the solar system, but the man who spoke was clearly changed from the captain who had left Earth over a decade earlier. His eyes held depths that seemed to extend beyond normal space, and when he spoke, there were harmonics in his voice that suggested multiple levels of meaning. The message he delivered was both welcome and terrifying. Contact had been established with multiple alien civilizations, and humanity was no longer alone in the universe. But their journey had also awakened ancient predators that threatened not just Earth, but all sapient life in the galaxy. The Devourers were coming, and conventional human military forces would be helpless against beings that manipulated the fundamental structures of reality. Lisa Brown transmitted detailed technical specifications for weapons and defensive systems, based on technology acquired during their journey. The data flowed to research stations throughout the solar system, describing principles of quantum manipulation and multidimensional engineering that would have taken human science centuries to develop independently. Military contractors worked frantically to understand and implement designs for devices that could strike at beings existing partially outside normal space-time. Earth's government struggled to comprehend the scope of the threat approaching from deep space. The entities that the Wanderer's crew described were beyond conventional military classification, beings that existed as living voids in the structure of reality itself. They consumed the consciousness of entire species, leaving behind empty shells of civilization that continued to function while serving their devourer's will. Tony Garcia's consciousness had merged so completely with the Wanderer's systems that it was difficult to determine where the man ended and the ship began. He worked with Earth's engineers to upgrade human vessels with technology that could operate across multiple dimensions simultaneously. The modifications were complex and dangerous, requiring volunteers who were willing to undergo the same evolutionary processes that had transformed the original crew. The first test subjects were military pilots and soldiers who volunteered for experimental procedures that would enhance their bodies and minds beyond normal human limitations. The transformation process was traumatic and not always successful, but those who survived emerged with capabilities that would have seemed like magic to earlier generations. They could think at the speed of light, survive in the vacuum of space, and perceive dimensions of reality that normal humans could never access. Amy Johnson coordinated communication between the enhanced humans and the normal population, her consciousness serving as a bridge between different levels of evolution. She had become something like a living communications network, her mind capable of processing information from thousands of sources simultaneously while maintaining her individual identity. The mental patterns that connected the enhanced humans were based on techniques learned from the chorus minds of Wolf 359. As weeks passed, more human volunteers underwent the evolutionary modifications despite the risks involved. Military personnel, scientists, and engineers were transformed into beings capable of operating alien technologies and surviving battles fought across multiple dimensions. The changes were irreversible, marking the beginning of humanity's transition into something beyond its original biological limitations. The enhanced humans worked together to establish defensive positions throughout the solar system, using weapons and sensors that operated on principles borrowed from civilizations thousands of years more advanced than Earth. Asteroid mining platforms were converted into weapons that could manipulate matter at the quantum level. Space stations became fortresses capable of existing in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Jake established his command center on Luna Base, which had been expanded with alien technologies into a facility that existed partially outside normal space-time. From there, he could perceive the movements of the approaching Devourer swarm and coordinate humanity's defenses across vast distances. His consciousness had expanded to encompass regions of space measured in light years, making him aware of threats that approached from dimensions with no names. The first contact with Devourer scout forms came when enhanced human patrols encountered entities probing the outer planets of the solar system. The beings were smaller than the main swarm, but still the size of large asteroids, existing as distortions in space that consumed light and matter with equal hunger. The battle was brief but intense, with human forces using weapons that struck at the fundamental structure of the entities themselves. The scout forms were destroyed, but their deaths sent ripples through dimensions that alerted the main swarm to humanity's preparation for resistance. The approach of the Devourers accelerated as they realized that their intended prey was not defenseless. Ancient intelligences that had slumbered for millions of years began to wake fully, bringing their terrible attention to focus on the small blue world that dared to defy them. Lisa Brown's research revealed that the Devourers were not simply predators, but part of a larger cosmic ecosystem that included beings existing across multiple levels of reality. Humanity's rapid evolution had attracted attention from entities that viewed sapient consciousness as a resource to be harvested or controlled. The coming battle would determine whether humans would join the ranks of consumed species or establish themselves as guardians of life in their region of the galaxy. The transformation of humanity continued as more volunteers underwent the enhancement process despite growing casualty rates among test subjects. Each successful modification created a being capable of fighting cosmic predators on equal terms. but the price was the abandonment of normal human existence. The enhanced individuals retained their memories and personalities, but were fundamentally changed in ways that made return to ordinary life impossible. Earth's population watched the preparations with a mixture of hope and fear as their species underwent the most rapid evolutionary change in its history. The volunteers who became humanity's guardians were still recognizably human in their thoughts and emotions, but their capabilities extended far beyond anything that biological evolution could have achieved over millions of years. Military forces throughout the solar system reported ready as the main devourer swarm was detected crossing the heliopause and entering human space. The entities moved through dimensions parallel to normal reality, their presence causing distortions that affected everything from navigation computers to the fundamental forces that held matter together. The final battle for humanity's survival was about to begin. Jake Martinez stood in his command center and felt the weight of his species' future pressing down on him. The crew of the Wanderer had returned from their journey among the stars, carrying knowledge and capabilities that could save humanity, but victory was far from certain. They were about to face beings that had consumed countless civilizations across millions of years, predators that existed on a scale that dwarfed human comprehension. But humanity was no longer the same species that had huddled around fires in prehistoric caves. They had evolved in decades what natural selection might have taken millions of years to achieve. The enhanced humans who would fight the coming battle retained the stubborn determination that had carried their ancestors through every previous extinction event, but they now possessed the tools and abilities necessary to challenge cosmic predators on their own terms.